It's Rebecca Simon Peter with Leadership Mojo. And thank you so much for being here today. I'm all about transforming church leaders they serve. And so this Leadership Mojo is really for you. This one in particular is a tough topic, but a really important topic for us to deal with. And it's really about the role of the church in gun violence. We have been living with escalating gun violence at least since Columbine back in 1999. And while other countries have solved their gun violence problems, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Norway, and the UK, they've all really greatly reduced gun violence, and they haven't put up with the level of mass shootings that we have. We've not solved it yet here in the US, and we're mostly about prayers and good feelings and, sending good wishes the way of those have been impacted by shooting, but it really hasn't made much of a difference. And so I'm really grateful to welcome my friend and colleague, the Reverend James B. Graham III. He's the pastor of New Haven United Methodist Church, and that congregation is in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which has recently been the site of a shooting in a medical clinic. So James, thanks so much for being here and shedding light on this situation that we're in. Really appreciate it.
You betcha, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, so James, you remember I texted you after the shooting, what can I do to help? And you responded with some really powerful words that have been very, very motivating and clarifying for me. And I wonder if you remember what you said to me and if you would share that with our listeners today.
Sure. I remember that when you called me, I was still in the grip of the shock of the event of the shooting that happened just a mile away from my church and from my home. And I remember telling you that, prayers are really appreciated, but the best thing we can do, and by extension you, when you asked me what you could do, is to put pressure on our politicians to get real about addressing the root problems of mental health, common sense gun policies, the pervasive culture of hate and violence, and the deflection of responsibility.
Boy, that's good stuff, James. I feel as strongly about it now as I did when you first said it. In fact, this whole series that I'm doing, the role of the church in gun violence, is because of what you said to me. And I thought, yeah, I really need to take action. And so part of it is just educating others about what they can do. And I mean, deflection of responsibility, let's talk about that. So who is deflecting responsibility? Is it our national leaders? Is it us? Who do you mean there?
I really think that it's everyone in society. That includes our national leaders, our state and local leaders. It's also us as human beings, as a part of our life. We go around thinking that, this is a bad problem, but there's nothing I can do. That I don't make a difference. And so I think sometimes we just abdicate our responsibility to do anything about it. And, oftentimes we think about, well, maybe I'll call or write my congressman, but how many of us really get around to doing that? And so the day after this happened, I was thinking to myself, how long, oh Lord, how long must we continue to endure these things?
Yeah.
And so I went to scripture, and the words of the prophet Jeremiah jumped out of me from the 18th chapter and the 3rd verse, when Joshua addressed the people of Israel, and he says, how long are you going to sit around on your hands, putting off taking possession of the land that God, the God of your ancestors, has given you? And that hit me square in the eyes. And I thought to myself, he's right. We as Americans have been given the land that we live in, and we have a responsibility to do something about it, to take it back, and to be able to put that pressure on our politicians, our elected officials, to be leaders, not just roll over and be victims.
Whew. Well, I am so mad at the NRA. Can I just say that? I know that they've been lobbying. It's not politically correct at all to say that, and I'm saying it. And I feel like there's this huge elephant in the room. Not that I'm against, Second Amendment gun rights or hunting or anything like that. But this proliferation of military grade weapons, what do we do about that, James? And I realize that may not be where you're concerned, but I mean, what do we do when there's such a strong lobby and there's so much fear infused in this situation?
Well, Rebecca, I think you hit the nail on the head. There is a lot of fear in this situation. Just the mere nature of having a shooting a mile from your house makes you want to think to yourself, maybe I need to go out and get a gun to defend myself. But I think the gun lobby has been, all the money that's in that gun lobby has been pressuring our politicians to not listen to the voice of the people. You know, Adam Hamilton recently conducted a survey among his huge congregation in Kansas City. And all of these members that he surveyed were gun owners. And I have to confess, I'm a gun owner. I have 3 firearms myself. And but from a very early age, I was taught that I have a responsibility to handle that gun safely and to make sure nobody gets hurt because of my gun. When I was just a boy, I was taught you never point that gun at somebody else, that you always keep the safety on, that you never store a loaded firearm, and things like that, and that we have the responsibility to control that. So Adam Hamilton surveyed his congregation, and these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gun owners all could agree that there are some common sense things that we can do, such as being responsible for our weapons, to store them safely, put them in gun storage cabinets with locks, trigger locks, to make sure that we have licensing and training on how to handle guns. Here in Oklahoma, we've got an open carry law. Anybody can walk in, buy a handgun, walk around with it plainly displayed on their hip. No license, no training needed. You don't even have to know how to load the stupid thing. But that's what we have here in Oklahoma. And so you wonder why things like this happen. The shooter here in Tulsa walked in 3 hours before he went to that doctor's office and shot 4 people and bought a rifle and used it to commit murder. Background checks are among some of the easiest laws that we have to thwart private party sales and straw man sales and trading of weapons and things like that. We could put pressure on our politicians to simply enact some common sense laws that would take the worst offenders out of the loop. I think it would go a long way. I am encouraged that our national leaders are talking about it. I hear the last 24 hours that they're close to having some legislation that will put some sort of limitations on it. But I don't think it's enough. I think it's just the beginning, and most of them would agree that too, that it's just the beginning. This is what they could agree on.
Yeah. So I wasn't aware of this change that happened after, must have been the Parkland shooting, but there had been a provision that the CDC could not study gun violence. This is from an earlier law of sort of unintended consequence. That got done away with, I think, in 2017, which is good. So the CDC is now able to study gun violence. It's the least studied public health menace in our society. So at least there's a little bit of that going on. But in the meantime, there are real impacts from gun violence. How did that shooting a mile away from your church impact you? How did it impact your congregation?
Well, Rebecca, it had a very intense impact on us. Some of the members of my congregation were patients of the doctor that was killed, and they went to that doctor's office. I had one member of my congregation who was supposed to be at a doctor's appointment when it happened, but had been in a car accident, and so found themselves stuck and couldn't get there. So it had a profound impact. It really caused people to recognize that even in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we are in danger of having something like this happen. And that it can happen in church. Just a few days later, I saw a report where someone walked into a church and killed a bunch of people there.
In Alabama,
everywhere.
That guy was 70 years old. He shot up two 84-year-olds at an Episcopal church potluck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just crazy.
So that's where it's upon us as citizens, as human beings, as people of faith, to try to do something about it. We can put pressure on our politicians to give them the courage to stand up against lobbyists and money that's funding their campaign to try and make a difference. And if enough of us stand up and say, we are not going to support you if you don't do something, it will eventually make a change. And, I'm a Methodist, and as a Methodist, our founder, John Wesley, had 3 general rules for living. The first rule is to do no harm. The second rule was to do good. And the third rule was to stay in love with God through attending to the ordinances of God. But those first 2 rules are so important, to do good and to do no harm. When we sit on our hands, we aren't doing good, and we are allowing harm to take place by not doing anything to stop it.
James, the biggest word that leapt out at me from what you just said is courage. That when we call our lawmakers, we actually give them courage to take action. So there's something in us that can give them courage. And I'm reminded of the baptismal vows that United Methodists take, and they may be very similar to vows that other Christians take. And it's to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. And I just think that's so powerful. So how can baptized Christians see themselves in this work of reducing gun violence? Like, how is this a living out of our baptismal vows?
I think it's a living out of our baptismal vows because we are called to do that. Part of that vow, when we say that, our baptism vows call us to accept the freedom and power that God gives us to resist evil, injustice, and oppression forms they present themselves. So we have been given a gift. We've been given power. We can make a difference, and we simply have to accept that and have the courage to move forward. And when enough of us do that, it magnifies that, and other people get courage too. When I heard this happen, as you well know, Rebecca, I reached out on Facebook to my congregation. I sent a mass email to my entire congregation, provided them copies of letters that they could modify as they saw fit to send to their representatives, their senators, their congressmen, and to ask that changes happen, to let them know that we will support you if you go out on a limb and stand up against gun violence.
That's excellent. James, if you could share that with me, I'll be happy to make sure that gets posted here as well.
Sure.
Okay. I after the last shooting, well, actually before Alabama, before Tulsa, the one before that, I called my senators. I got a call back yesterday from my senator's office, and they said, we understand, it was a message, we understand that you would like to meet with the senator. I hadn't said that, but we understand that you'd like to meet with the senator, and the senator is not currently available, but her staffers are. And I thought, first I got scared. I was like, I'm going to be in the... Anyway, I thought, and then I thought, because there's just so much we disagree on. But then I thought, you know what? I'm going to gather my colleagues. Yeah, I'm going to gather my colleagues and make an appointment to meet with these staffers and just say, we are tired of burying innocent people, and show up in numbers to bring courage, to encourage, to bring courage, and to let them hear from the people that are on the front lines of ministry with communities that are impacted by violence. So I really am taking to heart what you have to say. So what are some things? Yeah, what are some things, James? Okay, we can call our lawmakers. What else can we do as personal responsibility? If we're not going to deflect responsibility, like wait for them, whoever they are, what can we do in our own lives or our own congregations?
if we are gun owners ourselves, we can start by taking steps to make sure that gun safety measures are in place within our own households to make sure that nobody gets hurt with a firearm that we possess.
Okay.
In a community setting, we can go out of our way to teach children about gun safety, etc. We're partners in education with our local elementary. Get together with the teachers and have a class and talk about gun safety. These children are going through gun drills and all that stuff all the time, active shooter drills, and wouldn't it be great if we could do something to say this is how we make sure that you're safe instead of just here's how you hide. So that's another thing that we can do. We can organize in our communities to gather more people to speak out and be a part of this movement that is capable of making change, positive change happen. I've seen surveys that said more than 60% of Americans, something like 67% of Americans, are for some sort of gun legislation to limit access and availability of these firearms. And some common sense guidelines would be so helpful. It would be a good start. We need to advocate for better mental health funding and availability in our communities. Right here in Oklahoma, we've spent the last 30 years slashing budgets and closing mental health hospitals because we didn't want to pay for it. And the homeless, the people that have mental illness wind out on the street, homeless. They are oftentimes the victims of violence and gun violence. So, as well as then we have some that are able to get their hands on weapons and then harm other people as well. So there needs to be more social action and support for funding mental health and for making mental health available to all people, not just a certain class of people.
Yeah. Thank you, James. I just came back from annual conference, and the sheriff was parked out front openly there with a firearm strapped to his leg, and then there was a Secret Service guy inside, and a little earpiece sort of gave him away. Not Secret Service, but sort of security, not Secret Service, security guy, because the bishop has threats on her life, and she was briefed ahead of time if shooting happened, where she could go, what she should do. It was just really chilling, to see that there. And they made announcements at the very beginning. If you are carrying a gun, please don't do it here because things could get awkward if there's a real situation, i.e. if we don't know who you are and you show up with a gun, we're going to have to get that gun out of your hand. And it was just really chilling. And it was also kind of comforting. And I hate to say that, because I don't want to be one of those people who says, oh, you want to protect yourself from gun violence? Go get a gun. That's not me. And yet it's such a reality in once safe places. So let's end with this question. What's your take on
that? I have personally been threatened with violence with a gun as part of my ministerial office, and I can tell you that it is a very disconcerting thing that happens. And when that happened to me, my first concern was not for my own personal safety as much as it was for the safety of my family and bystanders. I didn't want somebody come in, opening fire, trying to get to me and killing other people. Yeah. And so at the same time, we can't live in fear all of the time, hiding. We have to be able to reach out to people in love and show compassion and understanding. We know that people are hurting. We know that people are angry. We know that people have problems with the system, that they don't believe that they've received justice. And so that's where we as a people of faith really need to step up and work for justice and work for equity and show compassion and lead with grace. And I think that word lead is important. We have to show leadership.
Yeah.
We have to give the public an example to live by.
We have to give the public what?
An example to live by.
An example to live by. That'll preach. That's good stuff, James. Thank you. So I heard compassion, justice, equity, an example. We have to lead.
And
And I
grace.
really appreciate, yeah, on this leadership mojo that you would be here today to share with us your passion, your ideas, your unwillingness to sit down and just pray about something, but actually to call us all to action. And that is a really profound call. And I'm going to be continuing this role of the church in gun violence series for the next 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to talk about mental health and gun policies. And then the week after that, we're going to talk about the culture of hate and violence, of discontent and tearing each other down, the other things that you mentioned that we need to deal with. So we're going to be talking about that for over the next couple of weeks. So thanks again, James B. Graham III from New Haven United Methodist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Appreciate you, appreciate your ministry, appreciate your leadership. And before we go, I just want to say that there are 2 other resources that I'd like to offer and make folks aware of. And the first one is Forging a New Path, Moving the Church Forward in a Post-Pandemic World. It's a book about how do we come out of the pandemic more connected than divided, moving forward since we can't go back to normal. And then if you really still want to go deeper or questioning, how do you create spiritual community? How do you really create renewal in your setting such that violence doesn't even enter people's minds, such that people are really reaching out to their communities with leadership and compassion and justice and equity? I invite you to check out Creating a Culture of Renewal. We have cohorts beginning this fall. And you can find more information on all of that at RebeccaSimonPeter.com. So thanks again for joining me today for this really important conversation. I always appreciate our time together. And I really appreciate you, the leaders that are out there. This leadership mojo is for you, to empower you, to encourage you, and to help you keep going on the front lines of change. So please share this message about the deflection of responsibility when it comes to gun violence. Share that with others who need the message. And for more leadership mojo, more leadership tips like this, hit the like button below for a reminder before I go live next week. And I can't wait to see you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the folks that are commenting. We appreciate you and we'll respond. Okay, take care. See you next time.